The morning sun rose slow over the fields, painting the sky in shades of gold and orange. The air was still cool, and the faint smell of fresh soil mixed with the sweet scent of corn. Samuel Watkins stood by his porch, a mug of black coffee in his hand, looking over his land like he did every morning. He was a big man, broad shoulders, thick arms, and a round belly that showed years of good eating and hard work. Most people in the county called him Big Sam. His farm sat about 10 miles out from the nearest town, a quiet piece of land that stretched out farther than the eye could see. He grew corn, okra, and soybeans mostly. He raised a few chickens and had 2 old cows that wandered near the fence line. It wasn't fancy, but it was his home. People who didn't know him well often saw only what was on the surface, a big black farmer who moved slow, talked soft, and minded his business. But those who'd been around long enough knew Sam was a man who had lived a full life. He carried himself with a quiet strength, and though he rarely raised his voice, people listened when he spoke. Sam had been living alone on that farm for nearly 10 years. He'd bought the land with his savings after leaving the Navy. Most assumed he'd done some kind of heavy labor job before turning to farming. Nobody knew the truth, that he'd once been part of one of the most elite military units in the world. He didn't look the part anymore. His hair had gone gray around the edges, his face fuller, his body slower. But behind those calm eyes lived a man who had seen things most couldn't imagine. He didn't talk about his past, not because he was ashamed, but because he was done with it. He'd seen enough pain and chaos to last a lifetime. The farm was his peace, his way of keeping his hands busy and his mind still. That morning, after finishing his coffee, Sam walked down to the barn. The wooden boards creaked beneath his boots. The old tractor sat in the corner, and beside it were stacks of feed and a few worn-out tools. He fed the chickens, then checked on the cows, patting one gently on the side. "You two keeping out of trouble?" he said softly, smiling as they blinked at him lazily. It was an ordinary morning. Nothing seemed out of place. The sound of cicadas filled the air, and the wind moved gently through the tall grass. Later, around mid-morning, his neighbor, a thin old man named Henry, stopped by in his dusty pickup. "Morning, Sam," Henry said, stepping out. "You got a hand I can borrow?" "My fence is acting up again," Sam chuckled. "That fence of yours got more problems than a soap opera. Come on, I'll grab my toolbox." The 2 men worked most of the morning, fixing the broken posts on Henry's property. They talked about crops, weather, and how expensive diesel had gotten. When they finished, Henry insisted on paying him, but Sam waved him off. "Just make me some of that cornbread your wife makes," he said with a grin. On his way back home, Sam drove slow, letting the breeze flow through the truck window. He liked this quiet life, no noise, no orders, no missions, just the sound of the earth breathing. But while Sam was out, something small and unsettling happened back on his farm. Down near the edge of his property, a wire fence had been cut, clean, like someone used bolt cutters. He didn't notice it that day. The cows didn't wander far, and everything else seemed fine. But a trail of faint footprints led through the grass toward his barn. That evening, as the sun dipped low, Sam sat on his porch again, eating supper, just baked beans and cornbread. The radio played softly in the background. A local preacher was talking about forgiveness, but Sam's thoughts drifted elsewhere. Sometimes at night he would dream of the ocean. The smell of salt, the hum of engines, the feeling of adrenaline right before a mission began. He'd wake up covered in sweat, staring at the ceiling, trying to remember where he was. But those nights had grown fewer with time. The farm had given him something no battlefield ever could: peace. Still, there were small things about him that showed his past. The way he noticed every sound. The way he always locked his doors at the same time every night. The way he sat with his back to the wall at the diner when he went into town. A few weeks before, a couple of teenagers had tried to steal diesel from his fuel tank. He caught them before they even started. Didn't yell, didn't threaten, just walked up behind them quietly and said, "You boys lost?" They ran faster than rabbits. Sam never reported it. He figured fear was lesson enough. But the world doesn't always leave peaceful men alone. A few miles away, in a rundown trailer park, a man named Ricky Doyle sat drinking with 2 others. Kyle, a nervous young guy who couldn't stop biting his nails, and Bo, a big fella with tattoos on both arms. They'd been talking about money, mostly about how they didn't have any. Then Ricky brought up Sam. "You know that big farmer out past County Road 14? Ricky said, leaning back in his chair. He sells his crops cash. Doesn't trust banks. My cousin said he saw him buy a tractor with a stack of bills. Bo laughed. What, you think he's sitting on a pile of money out there? Ricky shrugged. Why not? Old man like that living alone? He wouldn't even know what hit him. Kyle frowned. Ain't he that big dude? Looks like he could handle himself. Handle himself? Ricky grinned. He's fat, man. Probably can't even run. We get in, grab what we can, and get out. Easy money. They clinked their beer bottles together, laughing like fools. Ricky had done a few small robberies before, gas stations, empty houses. But this was different. The idea of robbing a man who lived alone on a farm seemed like an easy score. They planned it out, or at least thought they did. The next afternoon, they drove past Sam's property in an old beat-up SUV. They stayed on the main road, but slowed down enough to look. Sam was outside loading hay onto a trailer. His shirt stuck to his back with sweat and his hat shaded his face. Bo chuckled. Looks like he ain't moved in years. This'll be a joke. Ricky nodded. We'll wait till he's asleep. These country types go to bed early. We'll be in and out before midnight. They didn't notice Sam lift his head slightly as their car passed. He didn't recognize the vehicle, but he didn't think much of it. Still, something about the way it slowed down caught his attention. That night after dinner, he walked the fence line with a flashlight like he often did. That's when he saw it, the clean cut on the wire. He squatted down and touched the end. Smooth. Not torn, not chewed by an animal, cut by a tool. He stood there for a moment, silent. His heartbeat stayed calm, but his eyes narrowed. He looked out over the dark field. The sound of crickets filled the air. He didn't panic. He didn't call anyone. He just walked back to the house, his boots crunching the dry grass. Once inside, he turned off the porch light and sat by the window watching the road. Nothing. Just the stillness of night. He poured himself another cup of coffee even though it was late. The old habit of staying alert came back naturally. He hadn't felt that in years. When morning came, everything looked normal again. The cows grazed, the chickens clucked, the sun warmed the earth. Sam went about his work like always, but he made a mental note. Something was off. He'd start keeping a closer eye. Over the next few days, he noticed more small things. A tire track near his driveway that wasn't his. A cigarette butt near the fence. A faint sound of an engine one night that stopped just past the hill. Still, he said nothing. He didn't want to jump to conclusions. Maybe some kids were cutting through his land. Maybe someone was hunting nearby. But deep down, the old part of him, the soldier part, knew this wasn't random. Someone was watching him. He made a few quiet changes, moved some things in the barn, checked his locks, replaced a few light bulbs with motion sensors he still had from years ago. Then he cleaned his tool shed. In the back, behind a pile of boxes, was a small wooden chest. He hadn't opened it in nearly a decade. Inside were a few items from another life, a folded uniform, a rusted knife, and an old photo of his Navy team standing on a beach somewhere far away. They were all smiling, but Sam remembered what came after that photo, how not all of them made it back. He ran his thumb over the picture and then put it away. He didn't want to live that life again. But if trouble came knocking, he'd be ready. That evening, as the sky turned dark and the first stars appeared, Sam sat outside again. The porch light buzzed softly, and the sounds of night settled around him. He wasn't afraid, but he was alert. Somewhere down the road, that same old SUV rolled by slow again. Its headlights dimmed. Inside, Ricky and his crew watched the dark farmhouse from a distance. Ricky smirked. See? He's out there every night. Old man probably asleep by 10. We hit it Friday, easy. Kyle swallowed hard. You sure he's alone? Man, he lives like a ghost. Ain't nobody out here but cows. They drove off into the night thinking they'd found an easy target. Back at the farm, Sam took a deep breath and closed his eyes, listening to the night sounds. Somewhere in the distance, a coyote howled. He could feel the shift in the air. Something was coming. He didn't know when, but he'd felt that tension before, the calm before a storm. He stood up slowly and looked out at the dark fields that stretched endlessly before him. The moonlight touched the crops like silver dust. For a moment, everything was still. He whispered to himself, "All right then." Then he turned and went inside, locking the door behind him. He didn't know yet who was watching him or what they wanted, but whatever was coming, they were in for a surprise. Because Samuel Watkins might have looked like a simple farmer now, but he wasn't a man you'd want to test. Not then, not ever. And somewhere out there, 3 men were about to learn that lesson the hard way. The next few days passed slow and quiet, but something in the air around the farm felt different. Samuel Watkins could feel it deep down in his bones, the way a man feels a storm before it hits. He went about his chores as usual, feeding the animals, fixing a loose board on the barn, and driving into town for supplies. But he stayed alert. His eyes took in more details than most would notice. When he walked through the hardware store, he caught himself glancing at reflections in the window, checking who was behind him. It was a habit from years ago, one he thought he'd left behind. But lately it had returned on its own. In town, everyone greeted him warmly. People liked Sam. He was easy to talk to, slow to anger, and always willing to lend a hand. But nobody saw what was going on in his head. He kept that part buried deep. He stopped by the diner for lunch like he did most Fridays. The waitress, an older woman named Linda, poured his coffee with a smile. "You been keeping busy out there, Sam?" "Always," he said, smiling back. "Farm don't run itself," she laughed softly. "Well, don't work too hard. You need to come in town more often. Folks miss you." "I'm right where I need to be," he replied. He meant it. The farm was his peace, but lately even peace had felt thin. After lunch, he drove home, a quiet drive down the long, dusty road. The wind was light, carrying the scent of hay and earth. When he pulled up near the gate, something caught his eye again. Another tire track, fresh in the dirt near the fence line. It wasn't from his truck. He parked, got out, and knelt to look. The tread was wide, like from an old SUV or a pickup. He brushed the dirt gently with his hand, reading the signs like a man reading a story. Whoever it was had pulled off the road, stopped for a moment, then turned back around. Sam stood staring down the empty road for a long time. The only sound was the rustle of leaves in the wind. That night the moon was bright. Sam sat on his porch again, his old dog lying at his feet. He didn't have a gun next to him, he didn't need one yet, but he kept a long wooden cane by his chair. It wasn't just for walking. He stayed up later than usual, watching the road. Around midnight, a faint sound reached his ears. A vehicle somewhere far off, moving slow. He turned off the porch light and waited. The sound came closer, then faded again. Maybe it passed by. Maybe it stopped just beyond the hill. He couldn't see from where he sat. He waited another half hour, but nothing else happened. Finally, he stood, stretched, and went inside. Before going to bed, he checked every door and window twice. Then he set his keys and phone on the table beside the bed, just like he always did. In the dark, lying still, he listened to the quiet hum of the night. For most people, that silence was comforting. For Sam, it was the kind of quiet that made you listen harder. The next morning, a soft rain started to fall. The sky was gray and the fields shimmered with dew. Sam put on his boots and raincoat and went out to check the fences again. The cut section he'd found earlier had been repaired, but he noticed a small patch of mud nearby with footprints, 3 different sets. They were fresh. He stood there a moment looking down. Then he turned his eyes toward the woods beyond the fence. The trees stood silent, their leaves dripping rainwater. Whoever had been there was careful, but not careful enough. He finished his chores without saying a word. He didn't tell anyone, didn't call the sheriff. He wanted to understand what he was dealing with first. He wasn't a man to jump to conclusions. By noon, the rain stopped, and he sat at his kitchen table, a small notebook open in front of him. He started writing small notes, not about farming or repairs, but about signs, footprints, tire tracks, the timing of the passing vehicle. It was the same way he used to record intel on missions years ago. He wrote it down to keep his thoughts clear. Meanwhile, in that same rundown trailer park, Ricky and his crew sat around a scratched table, finalizing their plan. They'd been watching Sam for almost a week, convinced he had money hidden somewhere. Ricky spread out a rough hand-drawn map on the table. "We go in late after midnight. No lights, no noise. Kyle, you cut the fence where we marked it. Bo, you stay near the truck in case something goes wrong. I'll head inside with Kyle and grab what we can." Kyle looked nervous. "What if he wakes up?" "The dude's big," Ricky smirked. "He's old. He ain't gonna wake up fast enough to matter. Besides, we're not here to hurt nobody. Just in and out." Bo leaned back in his chair. "I'll keep the engine running." Ricky nodded. "Good, easy job, boys. We hit it tomorrow night." They all agreed, though Kyle's hands were shaking a little. He didn't like it. Something about that farmer didn't sit right with him. He remembered the way Sam had looked up when they drove by. those calm eyes that seemed to see straight through the car window. Back on the farm, Sam spent the evening cleaning the barn. He worked slow and deliberate, stacking hay bales neatly, making space near the back wall. Then he checked the locks on the doors and tested the motion sensor lights. When he flicked the switch, the bulbs glowed softly and then went dark again. He wasn't scared. Fear was a feeling he'd learned to live without, but he was ready. That night he went to bed later than usual, but he didn't sleep right away. He sat up in bed staring out the window, listening to the faint creaks of the old farmhouse. At some point he drifted off, but his mind never fully rested. When morning came, he moved like always, made breakfast, fed the animals, fixed a small leak in the roof. But everything he did now had a quiet purpose behind it. He was preparing even if he didn't say it out loud. In town, word had gotten around that someone had been stealing tools and fuel from nearby farms. Sheriff Collins had mentioned it at the diner. Some fool's been taking what ain't his, he'd said, shaking his head. Probably some drifters. Y'all be careful. Sam didn't say much, just nodded and sipped his coffee. Inside, he knew it wasn't random. He didn't know how many there were, but he knew they'd be back. Thieves who think something's easy don't give up until they try. That evening, he made one small change. Instead of sitting out on the porch, he stayed inside, lights off, blinds cracked. From there, he had a clear view of the road and the gate. The night was quiet again. But around 1 a.m., he saw what he'd been expecting. Headlights slowing down at the edge of his property. They stayed there for maybe half a minute, then turned off and disappeared behind the hill. He exhaled slowly. They were scouting again. The next morning, he went into town and bought a few things. A new lock for the barn, extra batteries, and some rope. The man at the counter joked, "You building a fort out there, Sam?" "Something like that," he said with a grin. Back home, he fixed the gate and checked every inch of the fence. His movements were calm but precise. He worked in silence, thinking about what was coming. That night, as the sun set red over the fields, he cooked a simple dinner and fed the animals early. The air was still. Even the crickets seemed quieter than usual. At the same time, miles away, Ricky's crew was gearing up. They had black clothes, gloves, and masks. Kyle's stomach turned as he checked his flashlight. "I don't know, man," he muttered. "This don't feel right." Ricky smacked his arm. "Don't start that again. We're going. You want money or not?" Bo laughed. "Yeah, don't chicken out now." Kyle nodded weakly. "All right, fine." They piled into the SUV and started the drive. The dirt road to Sam's farm was dark and empty, the moon hidden behind clouds. Back on the farm, Sam sat in the kitchen, lights off, a small lamp glowing near the window. He saw the faint glimmer of headlights in the distance. He didn't move right away. He waited, calm as still water. The SUV slowed, then stopped near the same spot as before. 3 figures got out, moving low and quiet. They crossed the fence easily where it had been cut before. Sam watched through the window, barely breathing. His eyes tracked their movements across the yard. They thought they were unseen, but every step they took he saw. He stood slowly, stretched his legs, and whispered, "All right then." He moved quietly through the house, turning off the small lamp. The darkness swallowed the room, and he disappeared into it like he'd done 100 times before in another life. Outside, the intruders reached the barn. Kyle's hands shook as he pulled the door open. It creaked louder than he expected. "Shh," Ricky hissed. "Keep it down." They stepped inside, flashlights moving across the hay and tools. The air smelled of dust and oil. Everything seemed still. Ricky pointed to the farmhouse. "He's probably asleep. We grab what we can, check the house if we have to." Bo grinned. "Man, this is easy." They didn't know that inside that quiet house, Samuel Watkins was wide awake. He stood in the hallway listening. His breathing was slow, steady. The floor beneath his feet didn't make a sound. He didn't grab a weapon. He didn't need one yet. He moved toward the back door and looked through the window. The faint beam of a flashlight danced near the barn. He recognized the shape of 3 figures, their shadows long on the ground. He didn't rush. Instead, he turned and checked the switches he'd set up earlier. With one small movement, the outside lights flicked off completely. Out in the yard, the men froze. "What the?" Bo whispered. Ricky cursed under his breath. "It's fine. Maybe a fuse." But Kyle's hand started shaking again. "I told you, man, we shouldn't—" "Shut up," Ricky snapped. "Move." They kept going, still thinking they were in control. But inside the house, Sam had already moved into position, calm and deliberate. The night around the farm grew darker, the kind of dark that made the stars look sharp in the sky. The crickets went silent again, as if even they were holding their breath. Out there in the shadows, 3 men thought they were hunters, but Samuel Watkins, the quiet man they thought was just a farmer, was waiting, and he knew exactly what to do when trouble came walking through his gate. The storm he'd felt coming had finally arrived. The night was so still that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The field stretched out in silence, and the only light came from the thin glow of the moon hiding behind clouds. Inside his farmhouse, Samuel Watkins stood completely still, listening. His heart wasn't racing, his hands weren't shaking. Every sound, every shift in the air, spoke to him like a language he knew well. Out by the barn, 3 shadows moved slowly. Ricky led the way, flashlight in one hand, the beam low to the ground. Behind him were Bo and Kyle, their boots sinking softly into the dirt. They whispered to each other, their voices low and tense. "Grab the tools first," Ricky said. "Then we'll check the house." Kyle hesitated. "You sure he's asleep?" Ricky rolled his eyes. "It's 2 a.m, man. He's out cold." But Kyle wasn't so sure. He'd seen something in that farmer's eyes when they drove by earlier that week. There was something calm there, something that didn't fit the picture of an old man living alone. Still, he followed Ricky into the barn. The smell of hay and oil filled the air. Their flashlights swept across wooden beams, sacks of feed, and the old tractor parked near the back. Everything looked normal. Bo grinned and started tossing things into a sack. Tools, a gas can, anything that looked worth money. "Man, this guy's got junk," Bo muttered. "Keep quiet," Ricky hissed. "We'll hit the house next. That's where the cash'll be." Kyle's gut twisted. He looked toward the farmhouse, dark and still against the moonlight. Something about it felt wrong, like they were the ones being watched. Inside the house, Sam moved quietly through the dark hallway. His feet made no sound on the old wooden floor. He didn't rush, he didn't need to. Years of training had taught him that patience always wins. He reached the back door, his eyes adjusting easily to the dark. He could hear them now, muffled voices, shuffling feet, the soft clang of metal. They were close. He glanced around the kitchen. Everything was where it always was, the coffee pot, the old radio, the lamp by the window. He slid the bolt on the back door, then turned off the small nightlight he usually kept by the sink. Darkness swallowed the room. Outside, the barn light flickered for a second and went out completely. "Man, what's up with the lights?" Bo muttered, shining his flashlight upward. "Just old wiring," Ricky said. "Stop talking and move." They stepped out of the barn, walking toward the farmhouse. The air felt heavier now, thick with something they couldn't name. Even Bo, who was usually loud and full of jokes, went quiet. Ricky looked back once. "You 2 get the back. I'll check the front." They split up, moving like shadows in the field. Inside, Sam heard their footsteps on the grass. He closed his eyes for a moment and took a slow breath. He didn't want trouble, but he wasn't about to run either. This was his home. He stepped into the living room, staying low and quiet. The old clock on the wall ticked softly. The seconds felt long. Then, through the side window, he saw it. A small flash of light from a flashlight beam moving near the barn. Another glint by the porch. He counted them in his head. 3. They were spread out but close. Ricky reached the front steps first. He tried the door, locked. He motioned to Bo to come around, whispering, "We'll check the back. He's probably out cold." Kyle stayed near the side window, too nervous to move. The night seemed to press down on him. He looked up at the farmhouse and felt the hairs on his arms stand up. "Ricky," he whispered, "I don't like this." "Shut up and keep watch," Ricky snapped. Bo and Ricky crept to the back door. Ricky tried the handle, it didn't move. He leaned down and started to pick the lock with a small tool. It was quiet except for the sound of his breathing and the soft click of metal. Then something strange happened. The door, without warning, opened an inch, like someone had unlatched it from the inside. Bo froze. "You see that?" Ricky blinked, confused. "What the—" Before he could finish, the door swung open all the way. The porch light flickered on again, washing everything in a pale yellow glow. And there, standing in the doorway, was Samuel Watkins. He wasn't angry. He wasn't shouting. He just looked at them with steady, unreadable eyes. His broad frame filled the doorway, the porch light outlining him in gold. Ricky stepped back, his mouth opening slightly. Hey, you lost. Sam's voice was calm, deep, and steady. Bo took a step forward. Look, man, we didn't mean. Before he could finish, Sam moved. It wasn't fast like in movies, just smooth and controlled. In one motion, he pushed the door fully open and stepped out, the wooden cane in his hand tapping the porch once. Put that down, old man, Ricky said, trying to sound tough. Sam didn't answer. His eyes flicked once to the side, catching movement near the window. Kyle, 3 of you, Sam said quietly. You've been watching me all week. Ricky swallowed hard. We just thought, yeah, Sam said, stepping closer, his voice firm but calm. You thought wrong. Something about the way he spoke made them both freeze. Kyle, watching from the window, felt a chill run through him. That man didn't sound scared. He sounded like someone used to being in control. Let's just go, Kyle whispered loudly. We messed up, man. Let's go! But Ricky wasn't ready to give up. Nah, he's bluffing. He ain't gonna do nothing. Then the porch light went out again. Darkness. Bo cursed under his breath. I can't see. A faint sound came from the porch, a footstep slow and measured. Ricky swung his flashlight around, the beam cutting through the dark, but it caught nothing but dust and wood. Where is he? Then from the side of the porch came a low, calm voice. Right here. Before Ricky could react, the flashlight was knocked from his hand. It hit the ground and rolled, the beam spinning wildly. Bo stumbled backward, bumping into the railing. Run! Kyle shouted, but Sam didn't chase them. He just stood there as they scrambled off the porch, tripping over themselves. He didn't want to hurt anyone. He only wanted them gone. Leave my land, he said firmly. They ran to the SUV, fumbling with the doors. The engine sputtered to life, tires spinning in the dirt as they sped down the road, headlights bouncing in the darkness. Sam watched until the lights disappeared over the hill. Then he walked back inside, locked the door, and stood for a long time in the quiet. His breathing was steady, but his hands were tight around the cane. He didn't sleep that night. He sat by the window watching the road until dawn broke over the fields. The next morning, he called the sheriff. Not to report a break-in, but just to ask if anyone else had seen strange cars near County Road 14. The sheriff said a few people had noticed 1 or 2 vehicles late at night, but no one knew who they belonged to. Keep your doors locked, Sam, the sheriff said. World's getting rough out there. I will, Sam replied. After hanging up, he stepped outside. The morning sun warmed his face, but the peace he'd once felt on his farm was gone. The land still looked the same, the fields, the barn, the quiet road, but something had changed. He knew they'd be back, and he knew next time they wouldn't run so fast. That evening, as he walked the fence line, he thought about the faces he'd seen the night before. They weren't professionals, just desperate men looking for easy money. That kind of desperation was dangerous because it made people foolish. He stopped near the edge of his field and looked out toward the woods. He could almost feel eyes watching him from somewhere far away. In that moment, he made a decision. He wasn't going to wait for them to come again. He was going to be ready. He spent the next day quietly preparing. He fixed the locks, checked every window, and set up a few old tricks he remembered from his service days. Nothing dangerous, just enough to warn him if someone crossed into his property again. A hanging tin that would rattle if the fence moved. A piece of fishing line tied across a gate hinge. To anyone else, it looked like normal farm work. To Sam, it was a plan. That night he sat outside again, the sky wide and full of stars. The quiet returned, but it felt different now, like the calm after the first wave of a storm. He thought about calling the sheriff again, maybe even having someone patrol the area, but deep down he knew this was his fight. He'd spent his life protecting others. Protecting his home was no different. Meanwhile, miles away, Ricky sat in the SUV, his jaw tight. The crew hadn't spoken much since that night. The embarrassment burned in him worse than fear. He played us, Ricky said finally. Old man scared y'all, that's what happened. Bo stared out the window. That wasn't no normal old man, Rick. He moved like he knew what he was doing. Kyle didn't say anything. He just kept looking down at his hands. Ricky slammed the steering wheel. We ain't quittin'. There's money in that place. I know it, we go back. Next time we do it right. Kyle looked up, eyes wide. You serious? He could have done anything last time. He let us go. Ricky glared at him. That's exactly why he won't expect us again. Bo frowned but said nothing. They didn't realize that Sam was already expecting them. As the sun set again on the quiet farmland, The wind picked up, carrying the faint smell of rain. Sam stood by his porch, watching the horizon. He didn't know exactly when they'd come back, but he knew it wouldn't be long. He'd spent years learning how to stay one step ahead, how to think clear under pressure. Now all that training, all that calm, was rising back to the surface. He didn't want violence. He didn't want to hurt anyone, but he wasn't about to be anyone's victim. When darkness finally fell again, he walked through the house once more, checking every door, every window, every shadow. Then he sat down in his chair, the cane resting across his lap. Out beyond the fields, hidden in the night, 3 men were making plans again. Plans they thought were clever, plans that would change nothing except the lesson they were about to learn. Inside his quiet farmhouse, Samuel Watkins waited in the dark, and this time he wasn't waiting just to scare them off. He was waiting to end it. The next few days felt long and heavy. The sun still rose over the fields like it always did, and the chickens still clucked at dawn, but something about the air had changed. It felt tense, like the land itself was waiting for something to happen. Samuel Watkins could feel it in his bones. He'd lived through enough uncertain nights to know when trouble wasn't done yet. He worked through his day like usual, keeping his routine the same. That was important. He didn't want anyone watching from a distance to see a change. To them, he needed to look like the same quiet farmer he'd always been. Big, calm, predictable. But behind that calm, he was preparing. He fixed the barn door that had been broken the week before, but this time, he replaced the old hinges with stronger ones. He checked the locks again, made sure every window could shut tight. He even adjusted a few motion lights he'd installed the day after the first break-in, this time angling them just right so he could see anyone moving near his porch or driveway. He didn't tell anyone in town what had happened. No one needed to know. If he started talking, people would gossip, and gossip would only make things worse. He'd always been private, and this was no different. That night, after supper, he sat outside on his porch with his coffee. The air was still, the sky clear and full of stars. His old dog lay at his feet, tail thumping slowly against the wood. Sam took a slow sip of coffee and whispered, "They'll come back." He didn't say it with fear, just certainty. And he was right. A few miles away in that same old trailer park, Ricky sat at the small table again, staring at the map of Sam's farm. Bo sat across from him looking uneasy, while Kyle sat near the window, quiet. Ricky's eyes were hard. "We go tomorrow night. This time we don't play around." Bo frowned. "Man, I don't know, he's different. That night he could have messed us up easy. He didn't even try." Ricky leaned forward. "That's why we gotta finish it. He thinks we're scared. We show him we're not." Kyle shook his head. "He wasn't scared of us, Rick. You saw him. That man ain't normal." Ricky slammed his hand on the table. "He's just a big old farmer. You two act like he's a ghost or something. We go in, we grab what we can, and we're out. This time we do it fast." Bo sighed. "Fine. But we do it your way, and if things go wrong, I'm out." Ricky nodded. Ain't nothing gonna go wrong this time. But deep down, even he felt something uneasy in his gut. The next night came slow, with clouds crawling across the moon. The wind picked up, whispering through the cornfields. Sam felt it too. He stood by the window, staring out at the darkness. He could feel the tension in the air like electricity before a storm. He didn't pace, didn't move fast. He just waited. Inside, the house was quiet except for the ticking of the old clock and the soft hum of the fridge. The radio on the counter was off. He didn't want noise tonight. By midnight, the road was empty, silent. But then, faint in the distance, came the low sound of an engine. It slowed near his property, headlights off. Sam didn't move. He just watched. The vehicle stopped near the same spot where the fence had been cut before. The engine went quiet. Then 3 figures stepped out, moving low across the grass. They thought they were quiet. They weren't. Sam had already spotted them before they even reached the gate. Ricky led the way again, holding a flashlight turned off. Behind him were Bo and Kyle. None of them spoke this time. They'd learned that much. The moonlight barely touched the ground, but Sam's eyes didn't need much light. He saw every shift of shadow, every movement in the distance. He took a slow breath and whispered, "All right then." He moved quietly through the house, checking the locks one last time, then turning off the hallway light. The house went dark. Outside, the three men slipped across the field. Ricky whispered, "Same plan. I go for the house. Bo, you cover the back." "Kyle, watch the barn." Kyle hesitated. "We shouldn't be here." Ricky glared at him. "You're here. Make yourself useful." Kyle swallowed hard and turned toward the barn. The old building loomed dark and quiet, the wind creaking the wood softly. He took a few steps inside, shining his flashlight low. Everything looked still. Hay, tools, a few feed bags. Then he noticed something odd. Near the back wall, a small lantern sat on a barrel, glowing faintly. It was old-fashioned, the kind that used oil instead of batteries. Kyle frowned. It wasn't there last time. He took a step closer, the light flickering across his face. Then he froze. There was a note taped to the wall beside the lantern. In large, simple handwriting, it read, "You shouldn't have come back." Kyle's heart jumped. He spun around, his flashlight beam shaking. "Ricky," he called softly. "Ricky." Out near the porch, Ricky stopped in his tracks. "Keep quiet, idiot," he hissed. But something in Kyle's voice wasn't fear. It was panic. Bo turned toward the barn. "You hear that?" Ricky waved him off. "Ignore him, he's just scared." Ricky crept up the porch steps, moving slower this time. The front door was dark, quiet, still. He reached for the handle, turning it slowly. Locked. He pulled a small knife from his pocket to work the latch, just like before. His hands were steady. He was focused. But this time, the door didn't budge. Then he heard something move inside. A soft creak, like a floorboard. He froze, listening. The sound came again, slow, steady, like someone walking. Bo whispered from behind, "You sure he's asleep?" Ricky didn't answer. The air felt heavier now. The sound of the wind had faded. Even the crickets were quiet. Inside the house, Sam stood in the dark hallway, breathing slow. He could hear their whispers through the door, every word, every nervous breath. He moved without sound, stepping to the corner near the back entrance. He waited. Outside, Ricky tried the door again. It didn't move. "Forget this," he muttered. "We'll break a window." Before he could take another step, the porch light flicked on again. The sudden brightness stunned them. Ricky shielded his eyes and Bo stumbled back a step. And then the door opened. Sam stood there again, calm and steady, his big frame filling the doorway. His expression didn't change. "You boys just don't learn," he said quietly. Ricky took a step back. "We didn't mean—" Sam's voice stayed low. "You broke my fence. You came into my home. And now you're back again." Bo lifted his hand slightly. "We're just— Look, man, we'll go. No trouble." Sam stared at him for a long moment, then he said, "You had your chance." He didn't raise his voice, but the weight in those words made them both freeze. Inside the barn, Kyle was still standing near the note, his heart pounding. He looked out toward the house and saw the porch light on again. He couldn't hear what was being said, but he saw the shape of Sam standing in the doorway. That's when it hit him. Sam wasn't just a farmer. He was something else. "Ricky!" Kyle shouted again. "Let's go." But Ricky ignored him. He was staring at Sam, trying to find his courage. "You think you scare me, old man?" Sam didn't answer. He just looked at him, silent. The wind shifted suddenly, carrying a low rumble of thunder from far away. A storm was coming. Ricky took a step forward. "You ain't gonna do nothing." Sam didn't move. "You sure about that?" Bo touched Ricky's arm. "Man, let's just leave." But before he could finish, the motion light by the barn came on. flooding the yard in white light. All three of them turned toward it, startled. Kyle came running out of the barn, panic in his eyes. "We gotta go, now!" "What happened?" Bo shouted. "He knew we'd come back," Kyle said. "He left a note. He's been watching us." Ricky's face twisted in anger. "He's playing games. I'm not leaving empty-handed." He turned back toward Sam, but the doorway was empty. Sam had moved. The porch light flickered, then went out again. Darkness swallowed the yard once more. Bo spun around, trying to find Ricky. "Where'd he go?" "I don't know," Ricky hissed. From somewhere near the side of the house came a low, calm voice. "You need to leave." They turned toward the sound, but there was nothing there, just the wind moving through the tall grass. Bo's voice shook. "Ricky, let's just go, man." But Ricky didn't listen. His pride wouldn't let him. He shouted into the darkness, "You think you can scare us? You're just one man." For a moment there was silence. Then, from the porch came a single sound, the slow, deliberate tap of Sam's cane against the wood. Tap, tap, tap. Each sound echoed through the quiet night. That was enough. Kyle turned and ran toward the SUV, his heart pounding. Bo followed, breathing hard. Ricky stood frozen for a second, staring into the dark, his jaw tight. When he finally turned to leave, he saw movement, a shadow stepping out from behind the porch post. Sam looked at him once more, calm and steady. His voice was quiet but carried through the air. "You picked the wrong farm." Ricky didn't answer. He just turned and ran. The SUV roared to life again, tires spinning as they sped away down the dirt road, disappearing into the distance. Sam stood there for a long time, watching the red taillights fade. Then he let out a slow breath. He didn't chase them. He didn't need to. He'd seen enough to know they wouldn't be back. Still, he stayed awake until sunrise, sitting by the window with a cup of coffee, watching the road. When morning came, the storm finally broke. Rain poured across the fields, washing away footprints, tire tracks, everything. The land looked clean again, peaceful. Sam stood on his porch, looking out over the soaked fields. The rain dripped from the brim of his hat, running down his coat. He didn't smile, didn't frown. He just stood there, calm and steady. He didn't feel angry. He didn't even feel proud. He just felt done. He'd come to this land to find peace, and somehow it had tried to test him. But peace, he knew, was never free. You had to fight for it sometimes, not with violence, but with resolve. As the rain eased and the clouds began to thin, Sam took one last sip of coffee and said softly, "It's over." The wind carried his words out across the wet fields, where everything was quiet again, and deep down, he hoped that the men who'd come to his farm had learned something too, something they'd never forget. The morning after the storm was bright and quiet. The sky looked washed clean and the air smelled of wet soil and pine. Sunlight spread across the fields, glimmering on the puddles that dotted the dirt road. Everything felt new, like the land itself had taken a long, deep breath. Samuel Watkins stood on his porch, hands resting on the railing, a steaming cup of coffee in his grip. The wood was still damp under his bare feet. His old dog sat beside him, tail flicking now and then as if sensing that something important had passed. For the first time in weeks, Sam didn't feel that heavy stillness in his chest. The fear, the tension, the old instincts that had woken up inside him, they were all starting to fade. The men who had come to his home were gone. He hadn't seen or heard a sound from them since that night. He'd been ready for them, and he'd made sure they understood this wasn't the place to bring trouble. But now that it was over, the quiet felt different. It wasn't the calm before a storm. It was peace. Real peace. He took a sip of coffee and looked out at his land, the fields stretching wide, green and soft under the morning light. The rows of crops were growing strong even after the heavy rain. It made him smile just a little. He turned his gaze toward the barn. The door still had a few dents from the last time, but it was solid. The lantern Kyle had found inside still sat on the shelf, unlit now. Sam had left it there as a reminder, not of fear, but of control. How keeping calm had saved him from letting anger take over. He walked out into the yard, boots sinking slightly into the wet dirt. The chickens clucked near the fence, pecking at the soft ground for worms. Life had already gone back to normal, and that was what he loved most about this place. No matter what happened, the farm always found its rhythm again. Later that morning, his old truck rumbled down the dirt road toward town. The nearest store was a few miles away, and he needed supplies: feed, oil, and a new set of light bulbs for the barn. The town was small, the kind of place where everyone knew everyone else. When Sam parked his truck outside the general store, a few folks waved at him from across the street. He waved back, quiet as always. Inside, the store smelled of fresh bread and motor oil. The clerk, an older man with silver hair, greeted him with a smile. "Morning, Sam. Haven't seen you much lately." Sam nodded. "Been busy with the fields." "The rain helped, though," the man chuckled. "That it did. You must have got lucky. Heard some fellas had trouble out your way." Sam paused for a second, pretending not to understand. "Trouble?" "Yeah," the clerk said, lowering his voice a little. "Sheriff was saying some local boys got themselves caught up in a mess. Tried breaking into somebody's place and got scared off. Didn't get all the details, but word is they skipped town." Sam just nodded, his face calm. "Shame when young men go down the wrong road." "Sure is," the clerk said, shaking his head. "Anyway, how's the farm holding up?" "Can't complain," Sam said softly. "Just taking it one day at a time." He finished his shopping, paid for his things, and headed back out to the truck. As he climbed in, he caught sight of the sheriff's car parked near the diner. The sheriff, a tall man with a weathered face, noticed him and gave a small nod. Sam nodded back, but neither said a word. They didn't need to. The sheriff had come by the day after the break-in. He'd found tire tracks, a few footprints, and a torn glove. Sam had told him what little he wanted to share, just that some men had come to cause trouble and left when they realized they'd made a mistake. The sheriff didn't push. He just said, "You handled yourself fine, Sam," and left it at that. On his way back home, the road was quiet again. He drove slow, letting the truck bounce gently over the ruts. He liked it that way. Slow, peaceful, no rush. When he reached the gate to his property, he stopped for a moment and looked out at the horizon. The field swayed gently in the wind, golden and green. He couldn't help but think about how far he'd come since leaving the Navy. Back then he'd been younger, sharper, always ready for the next mission. But when the noise stopped, the drills, the orders, the chaos, he'd been left alone with memories he didn't want to carry. So he came here. The farm had saved him in a way. The land gave him something to take care of, something that didn't fight back. It was quiet, honest work. That's what he wanted more than anything, peace and purpose. But trouble always finds quiet men, he thought. Still, he didn't regret how things had gone. He hadn't hurt anyone. He hadn't gone back to the man he used to be. He'd handled things his way, with patience, control, and a steady hand. As the weeks passed, life found its rhythm again. The days were long, full of work. The morning started early before the sun rose and ended late, with the soft glow of fireflies floating above the fields. Sam spent more time fixing fences, planting new rows, and tending to his animals. One afternoon, while fixing a tractor belt near the barn, he heard a truck pull up at the gate. He wiped his hands and looked up, squinting in the sunlight. It was the sheriff's car again. The sheriff got out, tipping his hat. "Afternoon, Sam." "Afternoon," Sam replied. The sheriff leaned against the car door. "Just checking in. Heard from a contact in town that those boys, Ricky and the others, they're gone. Left the county 2 days ago. Guess they figured it was time to move on." Sam nodded once. "Good for them." The sheriff looked at him for a moment. "You know, folks talk about you like you're some kind of legend now. That big farmer out there stood down a whole crew on his own." Sam shook his head, half smiling. "I'm no legend. Just a man trying to live quiet." The sheriff smiled back. "That's what makes it a good story." He tipped his hat again and climbed back into his car. "Take care, Sam." "You too, Sheriff." When the car drove off, the sound of the tires faded quickly, leaving only the rustle of the wind. Sam stood there for a while, looking down the empty road, then turned back toward his barn. That night, the sky turned gold at sunset. Sam sat on his porch again, the same place where everything had started. He rocked gently in his chair, his dog sleeping by his feet. The field shimmered in the fading light, fireflies blinking softly above the grass. For the first time in a long while, he felt completely at peace. He thought about the men who had come to hurt him. Maybe they'd learned something from that night, maybe not, but he hoped they'd think twice before doing it again to anyone else. He also thought about his past, his years in the Navy, the missions, the friends he'd lost. He'd spent so long running from that part of himself, trying to bury it under the soil and work. But that night had reminded him of something important. You can't erase who you are. You can only decide how to use it. He wasn't a soldier anymore. He wasn't a fighter. He was a farmer now. But strength wasn't just about fighting. It was about protecting what mattered quietly without hate. As the stars began to appear, Sam looked up at the sky. "You can rest easy now," he said softly, almost as if speaking to the ghosts of his past. "I've got it handled." The wind carried the sound of his voice across the fields. A few days later, a young boy from a nearby farm stopped by. He was maybe 16, skinny, nervous, with a curious look in his eyes. He wanted to learn how to plant corn the right way. His father had told him that Sam knew all the old tricks. Sam showed him how to till the soil, how to check for moisture, and when to plant so the roots would take hold deep. The boy listened carefully, nodding at every word. When they were done, Sam handed him a small bag of seeds. "Try these. They're strong ones," the boy grinned. "Thanks, Mr. Watkins. Just Sam," he said with a smile. After the boy left, Sam watched him ride off down the dirt road on his bike. It made him think about the kind of world he wanted to leave behind, one where people helped each other, not hurt each other. In the evenings, Sam started spending more time in town again. He joined the Sunday market, selling produce and homemade jam. Folks liked his easy way of talking, his quiet humor. They still whispered about what had happened, but no one brought it up directly. They just respected him more now. One afternoon, as he packed up his stall, the sheriff walked by again. He stopped, picked up a jar of jam, and said, "You know, Sam, I think you found what most folks spend their whole lives looking for." Sam smiled. "And what's that?" "Peace," the sheriff said simply. Sam thought about that for a moment, then nodded. "Yeah, it took me a while, but I got there." As the sheriff walked off, Sam looked around the small market. Families laughing, kids chasing each other, old friends talking over coffee. It made him feel grounded. Later that evening, back at the farm, he sat again on the porch as the sun went down. The fields glowed under the soft light, the same way they had when he first bought the place. The world felt right again. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes for a moment, listening to the sounds around him. The frogs in the pond, the wind brushing through the corn, the faint rattle of the wind chime by the door. For years, he'd been carrying a kind of weight inside him, the kind that doesn't go away easily. But now, sitting there, he realized something simple and true. Peace doesn't mean forgetting what you've been through. It means learning to live with it quietly, without letting it control you. He smiled faintly and whispered to himself, "Yeah, this is enough." The stars came out one by one, bright and steady in the dark sky. The land was quiet, and the house felt warm, and somewhere, miles away, maybe those men who once thought they could take from him were sitting in a different kind of quiet, thinking about the night they met the farmer who didn't scare, who didn't fight in anger, but who reminded them that real strength doesn't shout. It just stands its ground. Sam finished his coffee, stood up, and walked down the steps toward the field. The grass brushed against his hands as he walked, the moonlight shining softly over the rows of crops. This was his home, his peace, his redemption. And from that night on, no one ever tried to bother him again. The man who had once been a soldier had finally found what he'd been searching for all along, a place where he could rest, quietly, and call it home. The sun came up slow over the ridge that morning, painting the sky in shades of gold and soft orange. The fields shone wet with dew, every blade of grass catching the light like glass. The air was cool and still, carrying the faint scent of soil and wildflowers. Samuel Watkins stepped out onto his porch, coffee cup in hand, the wood creaking softly beneath his boots. The dog followed close behind, stretching, tail wagging lazily. Sam looked out across the land, the same land he'd worked for years, the same soil he'd turned with his own hands. Everything was alive again, calm and steady. The storms were gone, the nights of fear behind him. But as he stood there watching the horizon, he felt something stirring inside him. It wasn't worry. It wasn't restlessness either. It was something quieter, like a whisper of change. Life had been peaceful for months now. The sheriff hadn't been back since his last visit, and no one had caused trouble since that long night. People in town had stopped whispering about it too. They'd gone back to their routines, though they greeted Sam with a little more respect now. He didn't ask for it, but it showed in their eyes, the quiet kind that came with understanding. Still, Sam couldn't shake the feeling that his story wasn't done yet. He'd come here to escape, to build something real and calm, but peace, he'd learned, wasn't just about silence. It was about purpose. He set down his cup, rolled up his sleeves, and started his morning rounds. The chores never ended on a farm. There was always something that needed doing. He fed the animals, checked the fences, fixed a leaking pipe near the trough. The rhythm of work kept his mind clear, but lately he'd noticed how much land he wasn't using. Acres and acres of empty fields stretched beyond his main crops, too much for one man to manage. And that thought had started to grow roots in his head. That afternoon, while resting in the shade of the old oak tree, he thought about what it meant to live a good life. He had all he needed, a roof, food, peace, but he wanted to do more. Not for himself, but for others. He remembered something one of his old commanders used to say: if you've got the strength to build, use it for something that lasts. Maybe that was what he was meant to do now. The next week, he drove into town and stopped by the community center. The building was small, made of brick and wood, with peeling paint and a hand-painted sign that read, Oak Ridge Community Hall. Inside, a few local folks were setting up tables for a bake sale. The woman in charge looked up and smiled. "Well, look who's finally come around. You don't usually show up here, Sam." He gave a small nod. "Been thinking about something. Wanted to ask if y'all ever run programs for kids." "Programs?" she asked. He nodded again. "Yeah, after-school stuff. Maybe teaching them work skills, things they can use later. Fixing tools, planting crops, handling machines," she smiled. "That's a fine idea. We don't have much like that, though. Most folks' kids just hang around or help their families." Sam thought for a moment. "Maybe I could start something. Out on my land. A small group. Teach them work, patience, maybe give them something steady to do." The woman's face lit up. "That would be wonderful. You'd have plenty of kids who'd jump at that, especially the older ones." He didn't say much more, but by the time he left, she'd already written his name down on a notepad with the words farm program beside it. When he drove home that day, he felt a quiet sense of excitement, something he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't the thrill of danger or challenge, but the steady feeling of building something that mattered. The next few weeks were full of preparation. Sam fixed up the old barn, clearing out tools, repairing benches, and setting up a few sturdy work tables. He built a small shed near the edge of the field, filled it with basic supplies, wood, soil, and some spare equipment. Word spread fast in a small town. By the time the first Saturday came, 5 kids showed up at his gate. They were shy, unsure of what to expect. One was a quiet girl who liked working with her hands. Another was a boy who barely spoke but listened to everything. The rest came just to see what the big farmer was up to. Sam greeted them all with a nod. "Morning. You're here to learn, not to play. You ready for that?" They all nodded nervously. "Good," he said. "Then let's get to work." He started by showing them the basics: how to handle tools safely, how to plant in straight rows, how to tell when the soil was right. His voice was calm, steady, patient. He didn't raise it, didn't rush. He let them make mistakes, then showed them how to fix them. At first, the kids weren't sure what to make of him. He didn't talk much about himself, but over time they started asking questions about the farm, the animals, even his past. One afternoon, the boy asked, "Were you always a farmer, Mr. Watkins?" Sam paused for a moment, then smiled faintly. "No, used to do something very different. Hard work, a lot of travel. Taught me what matters most, though. Discipline, patience, and knowing when not to fight." The boy looked at him curiously. "You sound like a soldier." Sam didn't answer directly. He just said, "Let's just say I've been through enough to know peace is worth working for." The kids didn't press him. They respected the quiet in his voice, the way he carried himself. As the weeks went by, more children joined. Parents came by to thank him, bringing homemade pies and baskets of vegetables. They said it was good for their kids to have someone like him to learn from. Sam didn't know what to say to that. He wasn't used to being looked up to, but deep down he was proud. The land that had once been his refuge was now a place where others could grow too. By the end of the summer, the kids had planted a whole new section of crops, a mix of vegetables and flowers. They learned how to water, weed, and harvest. Sam taught them to work together, to share tools, to trust each other. One day, as the sun set behind the hills, one of the kids looked out over the field and said, It's pretty. Feels peaceful here, Sam smiled. That's the idea. He stood there watching them run down the path toward the gate, laughing, their faces lit by the orange glow of sunset. And for a moment he felt something he hadn't in years. Hope. But life has a way of testing you, even when things seem perfect. That fall, the crops grew slower than usual. A cold spell came early and a few plants died off. It wasn't much, but it reminded Sam that even peace came with its struggles. Then one afternoon, while he was loading hay into the barn, a truck pulled up again. It wasn't the sheriff this time, it was an unfamiliar face. A man in a brown jacket stepped out, holding a small notebook. "Mr. Watkins?" he called. Sam wiped his hands on his jeans. "That's me," the man smiled. "Name's Carter. I'm with the county's agricultural board. Heard you started some kind of youth program out here. Thought I'd come see it." Sam nodded. "Kids come out weekends. Learn some skills." "Nothing official." Carter flipped through his notes. "We've been looking to fund local projects like this, community farms, teaching programs, that sort of thing. You've got quite the reputation around here." Sam frowned slightly. "Reputation?" Carter chuckled. "All good, don't worry. Folks say you're the kind of man who keeps things together. Reliable, fair. You've done a good thing here." He handed Sam a small card. "If you ever want to expand this, build a learning center, maybe hire help, we've got grants for that. Think about it." Sam looked at the card for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "I'll think about it." That night he sat on the porch again, card in hand. The dog lay beside him, snoring softly. The sky was dark, filled with stars. He thought about everything that had happened, the fear, the fights, the quiet days afterward, and now this new chapter. He'd started with nothing but land and a need for peace, and somehow it had turned into something much bigger. He smiled faintly and said, "Guess we ain't done yet." The next few months were full of work again, but it was a different kind of work, the kind that gave back. The farm started growing new crops. The kids kept coming, learning more each week. The local paper even wrote a small piece about him, the farmer who teaches peace. Sam laughed when he read the title. "Peace," he said softly. "That's all I ever wanted." Years later, when people looked back, they didn't remember him as the man who once faced down a crew of thieves. They remembered him as the man who built something lasting, the man who took a quiet piece of land and turned it into a place of learning and hope. And though Sam never sought praise, he carried a quiet pride in his heart every time he watched those kids work the soil, laughing, sweating, learning. It reminded him that strength isn't about fighting, it's about building something worth protecting. One evening, as he watched the sunset from the porch, his dog at his feet, he whispered to himself, "You did all right, old man. You did all right." The fields stretched before him, endless and golden, the wind moving gently through the rows. The land was alive, and so was he, peaceful, content, and finally home.